Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiatoria. We're going to talk about Rondel Daggers, and this is a response video to Dave Rawlings' video that went up recently. Obviously, link below to his video. Go and have a look at that now. And it was a cool video. I enjoyed watching it. And this is a response video to that, but also kind of not a response video to that. So Dave made the assertion that essentially the guards on Rondel Daggers are just primarily that. They are primarily guards. Now, I sort of agree and sort of disagree. And first of all, let's have a look at Dave's objection. So Dave's objection, I believe, was that some people, me being one of those, I guess, have asserted that those Rondel guards are there for other purposes other than just to protect the hand. First thing I should say is I don't necessarily think that the rondel on a Rondel dagger, and bearing in mind that Rondel daggers sometimes only have a disc at the front or at the blade side, and sometimes have one at the back, but don't always. So sometimes they just have a small ball pommel or something else at the back. Sometimes they only have the disc at the front. So in that sense, Dave's assertion that that is primarily guard is probably right. But let's have a think about where the Rondel dagger sits in the evolution of medieval daggers, and also where it sits in its own time just by itself. So number one, where did the Rondel dagger come from? Well, it comes around in the middle to later part of the 14th century, when plate armour was nearing its completion, becoming the so-called all-white harness or fully encased plate harness. And it sort of replaces the basilard. Now, something that's very notable about the basilard is that it has a capital I shape with a bar at the top and a bar at the bottom. And this clearly doesn't offer an awful lot of protection to the hand in the way that a Rondel dagger does, because the Rondel dagger is a disc, the basilard is a crossguard, and then another one at the back end. And I think that we can't separate the basilard necessarily from the Rondel dagger. They share a similar role, a similar place in where they were worn by armoured men to balance out the sword, and obviously used in close combat, particularly as well carried by armoured men, and they seem to have been almost a sign of the armoured classes in the middle of the 14th century. The basilard came out of Switzerland and has various different forms and various different designs. Not all of them have this shape with the two bars. But they seem to have been more or less taken over by the Rondel dagger. And the Rondel dagger's primary purpose wasn't for civilians to fight each other. Okay, so this wasn't an epee or a foil. This wasn't something for people to fight each other in the streets with. Maybe look at something more like the cinquedea, or indeed other forms of later period basilard, obviously the bollock dagger, things like this. The Rondel dagger seems to have been associated particularly with the armoured fighting classes. So do you need a disc guard if you are an armoured man-at-arms? Well, I've borrowed the gauntlet from my armour here. So clearly, if you've got an armoured hand, you've got an armoured hand. So this is the dagger that's associated with the armoured fighting classes. Okay, this isn't designed primarily for unarmoured people to duel in the street. This is designed primarily for armoured people to finish each other off in armour. Okay, and there are various ways that it's shown used in the treatises, including sometimes being leant against a breastplate and all this kind of stuff. So if we've got an armoured hand, my hand is pretty much invulnerable to cuts and thrusts, with some exceptions. And if we look in the treatises, we see indeed a gauntlet deliberately being exposed there to thrust into with a knife or dagger or sword, and indeed being used to stab up there. So the holes into the openings, the exposed bits in gauntlets, are specifically noted in the treatises and exploited as such. Now, interestingly, they don't ever mention that one there, but I know from people who joust and who do armoured fighting, and my own experience as well, and people indeed in HEMA who use sparring gloves that are kind of like modern material versions of these in some ways, that is an exposed point in there as well. And people who use long swords, well, I don't have a long sword to hand, but people who have long swords do occasionally get stabbed into the gap in there. Now, what's interesting is that if I hold a Rondel dagger, indeed, as Dave says, it now provides the purpose of a guard. But what's important is it's not necessarily a guard for the unarmoured hand, it's a guard for the armoured hand. And that is true whether I'm stabbing with the point up or whether I'm stabbing with the point down. You'll notice in both cases it blocks the aperture or hole into the gauntlet to some extent. I'm still exposed on the inside line. Yes, I would normally be wearing leather gloves in here, but they're not going to provide any realistic protection against a stab from a dagger or a sword. So yes, indeed, that disc does help block that hole into the gauntlet. And obviously, if I've got two discs, it blocks the opposite hole at the other end as well. So in that sense, I actually completely agree with Dave. But I don't think that the disc guard on the Rondel Dagger is only that thing. And he does concede that. And so in this sense, I actually don't fully understand what Dave's objection is. Dave's a good friend of mine, incidentally, so I should probably have asked him firsthand, but this gives me an opportunity to do a response video, which he can then do a response video to, which you guys will enjoy watching, so you get to see the conversation as well. So I agree with Dave that these are guards, and we do refer to them as guards. But I don't think they're only that. As I mentioned, we have references in historical texts, and we see in the treatises sometimes the back. So if we look at Fiore, there's a specific technique in Fiore called più fortezza, or more force, where he literally rests the back hand onto here to break someone's defense with against the block against my arm, essentially to force through it. So that is to apply more force to with your hand, or in one case it seems to be with the breastplate when you're on top of someone. So that is to apply force to, and I would argue that the disc on here is also to apply more force to. And as I've said in previous videos, I strongly believe, and especially if we look back to the Basilard, I think this is supported by that having a pommel that is a disc or a bar or something like this, for anyone who's worn armour or fought in armour or just done, you know, living history or whatever in armour, you will know that if you're wearing a helmet with a visor, you have limited visibility down here. And also if you have gauntlets and other armour on, it reduces your sensitivity and your flexibility to some degree. And if you can reach down and index that dagger to get it out easily, if you've got the disc at the back, it is very easily with the gauntleted hand to still get that dagger out quickly and easily without having to look at it. So my counter argument in a nutshell today would be, yes, I agree, they are guards, both front and back. However, they are primarily guards to fill the hole of a gauntleted hand. These are not specialised civilian daggers at all. Things like the later period Basilard and the Cinque Deo and things like this are more civilian daggers. The Rondel Dagger is not. So it's specifically a guard to block the hole into a gauntleted hand, number one. But it doesn't only have that purpose, and it was very clearly, and we can see in the treatises, used in other ways as well, like to apply more force to, and I believe strongly to help you get it out of the sheath and lock it into your gauntleted hand and keep it secure in there when you're fighting in armour as well. So I do think this is absolutely a specialised armoured fighting knife. Obviously they were also used in civilian life, but just the same way as a longsword is not a specialised civilian unarmoured sword, it is very clearly a sword designed for initially for armoured knights, so is the Rondel Dagger. I hope that's been useful and interesting. Do make sure you go and check out Dave's channel. He's got some awesome content, and just to reiterate, he is a good mate of mine. This is not us having an argument about something, this is us having a civilised discussion about the topic. And you might agree more with him, you might agree with more with me, it doesn't really matter, it's all good fun. Go and buy yourself a Rondel Dagger and go and train with one of our clubs and have good fun. Check Dave's channel out, give him a like and a subscribe. Give me a like and a subscribe, and I'll see you back on Scholar Gladiatore channel really soon. See you folks, cheers! Just briefly to plug, the dagger is of course from Todd Cutler, so go and check out Todd Cutler's work. And my armour, yes, you will get to see it at some point. I'm having a new arming doublet made, so that's why you haven't seen more armoured videos from me yet. My armour is from Mark Vickers incidentally, and I have full harness, but in time, be patient, you will get that. See you soon folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.